Dark Bleatings everybody, I'm back with another list video and today we're talking about my favourite vampire books of all time. It should go without saying that I haven't read all of the vampire fiction, but sometimes I get messages about books that I've missed off these lists, and very often I make these lists and I've completely spaced and just forgotten something that I absolutely love as well, so I'm usually cursing myself out. Cussing myself out? I prefer cursing myself out. So that's what we're going with. But if you do have a great recommendation for me, please put it in the comments because I'm always, hunting for great scary vampire fiction. A couple of you have requested some video topics and I'm working on those. So, for example, someone asked me for a top 10 folk horror recommendation. I'm working on that, but I haven't read like an enormous amount of folk horror yet. So I'm just waiting till I've read a few more. Otherwise, the entire list will just be Adam Neville, basically. So yeah, bear with me on that. I am working on that for you. And Eric Smith, hello YouTube bestie. I have made a note of everything you've requested as well, which has also put me on another reading binge because I realised I haven't read many killer animal books, so I'm working on that. Yes, and a video that will soon be coming, hopefully next week, is the best book to movie adaptations. Those are all coming. So for today, let's go into our toothy fanged fiendish friends. So these first three I'm just going to very briefly touch on because I haven't actually read them yet, but they were all recommended to me by people that I trust with good book taste. So first of all, we've got Alma Katsu's The Hunger. This is about the Donner Party, with vampires, presumably. So I'm not sure about this. I did start it. It wasn't my cup of tea. I wasn't like in the mood for it at the time, but I am planning to go back. I struggle a little bit with fiction that's like based on real world stuff, especially if it's real world stuff where people died. I get a little bit weird about it, so that's why I put this down. But I'm planning to go back. I was enjoying the writing. We've got Let the Right One In, which of course the movie was adapted from, and then the American remake of the movie. I actually prefer the original film, so I've seen both versions, and so I bought the book because I really enjoyed the film. So I'm looking forward to reading that. That one is about a little boy that befriends a little girl, and maybe someone's a vampire, who knows? And then the last one is The Historian. This was recommended to me by Chloe Black, who did all of my tattoos. And speaking of vampires, this is my favourite part. This is my Lucy from Dracula. So this is my horror sleeve. Chloe did all of that for me. She is amazing and I just trust her taste in everything. If you already follow her on Instagram, you will see that she's just basically like a goth queen, and I love her style, her reading taste, her tattooing, everything basically. Probably a bit weird to just fangirl over my own tattoo artist. Probably a bit weird to call him my own tattoo artist. Let's just move on before I dig myself into a really weird hole. So first up, here are the Sookie Stackhouse novels, or the Southern Vampire novels, I think they're called. Southern Vampire Mysteries by Charlene Harris. This is the first 10. There are more. I'm not sure how many are in the series in total because this is where I stopped. I think I either bought this on a whim or I maybe received it as a gift, but in any case I read these first 10 and then I didn't feel compelled to read any further. So the Sookie Stackhouse novels are what the show True Blood is based on, and this is very rare for me, but in my humble opinion, True Blood is far superior to the source material. I didn't like Sookie as much in the books, which is a bit of an issue because we're in a first person narrative and she's the protagonist. There are a few weird sort of plot holes and inconsistencies in these books as well, which I probably only noticed because I read them all just one after the other in quick succession. I'm sure that if you were reading these as they were released and you've got, a bit of a wait between books, these kinds of things wouldn't even occur to you maybe. It's like when you binge watch a TV show and all of a sudden you can see all the plot holes where if you watch something over a 10-year span that wouldn't have happened. So yeah, these are really good though if you're just looking for something a little bit spicy, a little bit is saucy, and if you're looking for sassy characters, but like I said, I do prefer the show because the cast is a lot more diverse than the book cast, and I just found a lot of the characters more likable. I find that the show is very open-minded in a way that the books aren't, but yeah, I'm not insulting the books by any means. They're just not my cup of tea, but people really love them. So if you want to get into a series where the books are not enormous and you can get through the series quite fast, this is like quite a good one for you to read. This next one, I am, for obvious reasons, really not going to talk about it much because who hasn't heard of the Twilight series? So this is obviously a YA series, a YI series. Where do I think I'm from? A YA series about a teenager called Bella who moves to a town called Forks to live with her dad, and she meets some vampires in the school. So, obviously everyone in the world has heard of Twilight. There are 4 books in the first main series, a novella about one of the side characters called The Short Second Life of Britannia. Then there's Midnight Sun, which is Twilight again, but written from Edward's perspective this time instead of Bella's. And then you also have Life and Death, which is Twilight again. I mean, I don't know how many times Stephanie Meyer is actually going to write the same exact story. Crafty, crafty. That one is Twilight, but with the gender swapped. So the human character is a boy called Beau, I think, and I can't remember what the vampire equivalent of Edward is, the girl equivalent, but in any case, there's a whole bunch of these. Very popular if you enjoy YA fiction, if you enjoy paranormal romance, if you like love triangles, things like that. If you like a different take on vampires, you might like these if you haven't read them. I can't believe I'm actually going to do this, but in defense of Stephanie Meyer's vampires, at least she tried to do something different. I know everyone makes fun of the sparkling thing. It's not as stupid in the book as it is in the film. I think that the thing in the film that kind of really pushed it into the absurd kind of thing is the twinkly sound effect they put when he's on screen and he's glittering. In the book, they're described as like they sparkle in the sun, but it's like they're made of marble. So the way they're described is like they're indestructible rather than they're twinkling like fairies. So that's Twilight, in case you've been living under a rock for like 12 years and you don't know it. And last up for series, we've got the Vampire Chronicles by Anne Rice, and the first one in the series is Interview with the Vampire. I do have about 10 Vampire Chronicles books, but I didn't want to individually get them all off the shelf, so I'm just holding up this one for you. So the Vampire Chronicles, the first few in the series, if you're interested in those, we've got Interview the Vampire, then The Vampire Lestat, then The Queen of the Damned, then The Tale of the Body Thief, and then Memnoch the Devil, I think, is the 5th one, which really isn't much to do with vampires actually, but that's as far as I read, and then I've got a few more in the series to go. So this series starts with Louis as a protagonist, but basically this is a very Lestat heavy series. He's a very, very popular vampire character. You may have seen the film with Brad Pitt and Tom Cruise, which I personally think is a great adaptation and a great film. The Queen of the Damned was made years later, and it's supposed to be a sequel, but oh my god, like, I don't know, Tom Cruise, it was like 20 years older by the time they made that, didn't want to do it, so if you just consider that its own separate thing. We're talking sort of like the gothic romance of tortured vampires. Well, Lestat's not that tortured actually, he's kind of villainous, but in a great way. If you want more information on the Vampire Chronicles, there is absolutely nobody better in the world to give you that info than the Maven of the Eventide on YouTube. I will put a link to her channel and the specific Vampire Chronicles video in the description. I have never seen anyone on the internet that knows more about these Anne Rice books than she does. And so next up, this is one of my favourite vampire books and no one's heard of it. So it's an indie novella called King Carrion. It's by Rich Hawkins and it was published by the Sinister Horror Company. Before I go on, before I forget to say it, if you're interested in this after I've described it, you only have until January to get it, because unfortunately Sinister Horror Company is shutting down, which means all of their books are going out of print. So I really, really recommend this one, though I think that this is in my top 2 books that they've ever published. I really, really enjoyed it. So this is about an ex-con called Mason who goes back to his hometown in the UK to try and get his wife back, basically, after all the mistakes he's made. But there's something sinister lurking in his town. Couldn't tell you what it is. It's vampires! Within like days or within a week or something, the town's been quarantined and those who are there are like trapped inside with vampires. And I loved this book so much because I'd read these Sookie Stackhouse novels, I'd read the Vampire Chronicles, and I'd read Twilight. So these are the vampire books that I was reading around the time. And then finally, I read a book that had sort of like 30 Days of Night style vampires, which I absolutely love. And that we'll save that for a little bit later in the video. But yeah, this is, you know, scary, bloodthirsty, monstrous vampires, if that's what you're into. It's a short read. It's just a little novella. I really, really enjoyed it. It's due for a reread. I've been talking about this quite a lot recently, I think because Sinister Horror Company is going out of print, so I've been just telling everyone about this. I'm like, hurry up and get it before it goes. So this is one of my favourite vampire books of all time. Next up, people argue about whether or not this is vampires. I'm going to say it is, but you know, kind of maybe it's a like weird take on vampires, but it's House of Hunger by Alexis Henderson. This is set back in ye olde days. I mean, not that oldie days, but you know, a bit further back, like Victorian times maybe. So it's about a blood maid. And what is a blood maid, I hear you ask? It is a sort of servant, I guess, like an employee who goes to basically live with a rich person, probably in a mansion, and their job is to bleed so that the person who has hired them, who now owns them, can drink their blood. So you know, it's supposed to have healing and youth properties and all of that stuff. So yeah, this is sort of like a rags to riches story, but it, you know, inevitably things start to get quite horrific. This woman is sort of like plucked out of the cesspit of her ordinary life, which is, you know, quite the struggle, and finds herself in this life of luxury. The blood maids are treated very well. They get to live this, you know, life of opulence and wealth. So it's a very tempting prospect. I loved this book. I do see reviews that say, oh, this is a great vampire novel, and other reviews are like, this isn't vampires. So, you know, make of it what you will, but I think that this is a really great twist on vampire tropes at the very least, and I really enjoyed it. It was a great book. Next up, ye olde classic of Dracula. I love my this edition of it with its lovely tinted edges. Won't talk too much about this because obviously that everyone knows about Dracula, written by Bram Stoker. This is about a count called Dracula who wants to head over to England to buy up some properties and, you know, maybe bite some folk, you know, whatever vampires like to do when they're exploring the world and splashing their cash everywhere, splashing some blood everywhere. I just don't believe it's possible that anyone in the world doesn't know the story of Dracula through some form or other. There are like 1,000 film adaptations of it, so that's all I'm going to mention for this one. But you know, if you haven't read Dracula, especially if you enjoy classic literature, this is probably a book that you would enjoy. Next up, one of my top 3 vampire books of all time at the moment, and it's knocked so many things off its perch, is the novelisation of 30 Days of Night by Tim Lebbon, which I know might sound like a weird choice because it's a novelisation of a movie, so it's not the author's original story, so he would have been working off the script or the film, whatever. However, I am an enormous fan of 30 Days of Night. It's one of my favourite films of all time, one of my favourite vampire films, certainly. It's in my top 2 vampire films of all time. I also enjoyed the graphic novels. So alternatively, if you're a comic person and you prefer graphic novels, then you should pick this up as well. So this is the original, then there was the film, and then there was this. So this is basically the novel version of the film. Even though I've seen the film 1,000 times, so I knew everything that was coming in this book was still scary. But it's the way that he describes like the impending doom of everything coming. So in the film, obviously you're seeing it from certain vantage points when the vampires start shutting the town off with everything, but you're in the heads of more characters in here in those opening scenes, so characters that you see for like a split second on screen and you know they're vampire fodder, but you don't get much of them in the film. But in the book you get a bit more, so like living the vampire sort of like descending on them is so scary, and it just made me feel cold. It's the perfect winter read. I'd actually put this as a Christmas read, even though it's, you know, it's not Christmas themed, but it's set in snow, cold and all of that. It's my favorite iteration of the story by miles, and I love it. And then obviously, yeah, as I said, if you love graphic novels, the story of the comics is great as well. You can't really go wrong with 30 Days of Night, can you? It's just one of the greatest. Alrighty, next up, another little novella, like a lesser known book, but I would rate this Catch Up on Everything by Nathan Robinson. I don't know if this is in print anymore. You might actually have to find a secondhand copy, but it's really worth it if you can get it. It's I don't want to say anything about it really because it's very small. It's basically about a guy called Elliot who's kind of been in mourning for like 2 decades, I think, because, you know, his kid went missing. And I'll say no more about that. I wonder what happened. Alrighty, a couple of like teeny tiny classics next. So if you like vampire fiction and you're interested in sort of like the origin of vampire fiction, this is the first vampire story published, The Vampire by John Polidori. It's a teeny tiny little short story basically. It's not even really a novella. And then I've got Carmilla by Sheridan Le Fanu. I know I said that with a Welsh I heard the Welsh twang as I said that. I'm not going to try and pronounce it again. So these are some more classic gothic vampire tales. I really enjoyed the language in these. I do struggle sometimes with classic language. It depends on how far back we're going, and we're going back a couple hundred years with these ones, a few hundred years actually. But they're just lovely stories to read if you enjoy classics. Alrighty, next up, this is a little weird, right? So this is Carrion Comfort by Dan Simmons. It is an enormous book. This is Psychic Vampires. If you've seen What We Do in the Shadows, the TV series, like Colin Robinson, although the characters are much meaner than Colin Robinson in this, I'm currently about 28 hours into the 40-hour audiobook that I'm listening to of this because the print is very small. I found the book just seemed so enormous. I found it very daunting, but I've wanted to read it for such a long time. It's been recommended to me by so many people. So even though I haven't finished it yet, I have been enthralled with it for the 28 hours that I've listened so far. I've been decorating my house, so I've managed to get through quite a big chunk of it. But usually I listen to audiobooks when I'm cleaning and cooking and things like that. There's this character called Melanie in here, right? And every time I get to one of her chapters, I'm like super interested because the further into the book you go, the more heinous this bitch gets, honestly. At first, I was just like interested in like the dynamic of this little group that we meet in the beginning. And then every time she talks later on, you're like, you piece of poo. She's the worst, but like in a great way to read. So I'm just like loving to hate her right now, and I'm hoping she gets a comeuppance, but who knows, because I've got 12 hours left of the book. But I'm really enjoying that one. I want to say something really quick in case any of these people are watching. Adam Neville, Gemma Amore, Kit Power. If you ever wanted to write a scary vampire novel, I'd really love that. Please. You know, as a selection of my favourite writers, it would just be so cool if you could maybe write a scary vampire book. Thanks, but thanks, you're great, you're the best. So I'm obviously not going to do a list without Salem's Lot by Stephen King on it. This is about a guy called Ben who goes to Salem's Lot, or Jerusalem's Lot, but they call it Salem's Lot, and there be vampires afoot. It's kind of Stephen King's homage to Dracula, so if you're a Dracula fan, you might enjoy this. I am of the camp that this book is really scary. I really enjoyed it. I think it's the second book he had. Yes, this is his second published novel, and it's one of his best. It's just such a great book. So there are people who find this very slow and boring, and then there are people like me who found it really scary. But if you like vampire fiction and you're a Stephen King fan already, you haven't picked this up, you know, I recommend it. I think it's great. I Am Legend by Richard Matheson. This is one of the greatest vampire stories. I think it was written in the 50s, if my memory serves me. If you've seen the film, forget about that. Yeah, when I get to my best books adapted to movies video, I Am Legend will not be featured. Really, really hated that film. I feel like if I'd seen the film and I hadn't read the book, the Will Smith one, I probably would have enjoyed it more, but because this is one of my favourite books, one of my top 5 books of all time, I was just so angry watching that film because they changed the best things about the book. I never understand why they do that. While we're on this topic, why can't they make a decent adaptation of Resident Evil? They'll still be making versions of that when I die and they won't have lived up to the games. Just follow the story in the game. It's not that hard. It's the perfect narrative. Why don't start it and then go off it? It's not that difficult. Sorry. So this is about Robert Neville, who is the last man on Earth alive, and everyone else in the world has become a vampire. It is so good, and some of the scary scenes are so terrifying. He's basically created like a fortress out of his house, like a vampire-proof fortress. Obviously, that takes a lot of thought and upkeep and maintenance, and there are very, very serious concerns because if any of his like fail safes go wrong, the vampires are getting in and he gonna get got. I don't know why I did that accent. So night after night, when he's barricaded inside his home, the vampires like turn up and they're trying to lure him outside, and then by day he's going around trying to find and stake them. It's just so good, and I do think that Will Smith was great in the film, and I thought that the film was fine, but as an adaptation of this, I just don't know what they were thinking with the changes that they made to the antagonists, because in the book they are speaking, thinking, engaging characters, vampire characters, people from his real life that he knows, whereas like in the film they kind of just made them all one thing, like they all looked the same, they didn't really have personalities. I don't know, it just felt so flat for me, and I just thought it would have been better if they just stuck to this. So yeah, I can't really talk this book up enough. If you enjoy scary vampire books, this is just such a great story. Next up, this is my first vampire book that I can remember reading. I'm sure I probably read like some kiddie vampire books when I was little, but it's Monster by Christopher Pike. I love this book. So, wee bit of a backstory about me as a child. I've always loved horror, but my mum wasn't like lenient about what she let me read or watch. Like, she tried very hard to make sure that I was only consuming like age appropriate stuff. So and I'm the oldest kid as well of hers, so I was like the first kid, the test run kid. I'm sure she'd probably relaxed a bit more by the time she got to my brother. She and all my aunties, like basically all the women in my family, read horror, like Stephen King and Dean Koontz and things like that. So those books were always there, and my mum likes horror films. Just so cool growing up in a horror household, I have to say. Halloween was always so much fun. So she got me a library card, and like Matilda, I would go and get 10 books out at a time every fortnight, because that was the limit for what they'd let me take. And even though I think I was about 10 when she got me that, they would let me take books out of the teen horror section. So I was reading like those point horrors, Sean Hudson and those R.L. Stein point horrors and things, like not so much the Goosebumps books because they felt too kiddie for me. And then my mum went on a search one Christmas for me for like a bit more like my speed kind of horror, and she bought me Monster by Christopher Pike and Remember Me, and this book like changed my life. Like, I don't think, because this is a YA book, I don't think that she looked at it too hard. And the opening scene, a girl called Mary bursts into a house party and guns down a couple of classmates. So and it's like described really brutally. I can still remember what I pictured when I read this originally when I was a kid, and it's such a good book. So I gotta have to reread. This is my original copy as well. It's very yellowed and aged, but oh my gosh, this really I think if there was I think if there's a single work of horror that took me from being interested in horror to absolutely obsessed, and it like set the trajectory of my entire life, it's this book. I loved it. And the last book for today on this list is Nosferatu by Joe Hill. This is definitely a good Christmas read if you're looking for horror. And let me just very quickly read the back to you. It says, hi, can you please subscribe? So this is about a girl called Victoria McQueen, and it's kind of like a story of her entire life. Like we follow her over like many years, so from her teen years to her adult years. This is so great. And also, if you're an audiobook listener, the audiobook narrated by Kate Mulgrew is, she really goes for it. So I had a great time. I was dipping into the book, and then when I couldn't read because I had to drive or something, I was going into the audiobook. It's such a great read. The antagonist, the villain, oh my gosh, he is absolutely heinous. His name's Charlie Manx. He's driving around this car. He's picking up kids and taking them to Christmas land. And I don't really want to talk about it much more because this is like a horror dark fantasy, I would say. I don't read a lot of fantasy, but there are definitely fantasy elements to this world, and the world building is so great. And it's very weird. It's like a real weird story. I love Joe Hill's writing. I've only got into him in the last few years, but I really like how sort of like bizarre some of his ideas are. And this is just a wonderful book. This is one of the first books I read of his. It's I think it's the biggest book that I've read of his. I don't know if he's done anything with more of a page count than this one, but it's worth every page. It's just a really, really wonderful book. So there you have it, all of my toothy recommendations for you. I hope that you've enjoyed this video. Like I said right at the start of the video, if you have any vampire book recommendations for me for like scary adult vampire horror, I would love to hear it. Or if you have recommendations for a good vampire series, it doesn't necessarily have to be like really scary adult horror. I am looking for another series to get into. It's been a while since I really got into like a good series of books, and I know there are a whole bunch of vampire series out there that I haven't, yet even scratched the surface of. So yeah, please let me know what you think, what you recommend in the comments, and I will see you next week. I still don't know how to end a video, so please.